Welcome back to Deep Thoughts, ladies and gentlemen. On this rather cold Friday night, I got the equipment out here. I don't even have a little space heater. See, I've learned my lesson that when I have time, I need to pound these episodes out, because invariably I will get busy and I'll lose a couple weeks from my recording regiment. And then we all suffer, don't we? I'm joking, newcomers. Tonight I want to talk about something that's, I'm going to keep it as informal as possible. By informal, I'm not going to jump into a bunch of chemical names and biology, neurology, terminology. It's all starting to come together. Because I've been actually talking to some of the listeners, and I've noticed that when the report is that when I'm more metaphorical and abstract about scientific explanations, that people get it more and they get more out of it. And so this is what we're going to do with this episode called The Electric Mind. Now, for some of you, you're going to know a ton of this stuff. But I think, having had many lunch and dinner with individuals with even degrees in this, they memorized and repeated a bunch of stuff in their lifetime. But when I started to show the epigenetic full life cycle of how electricity is metabolized by our mind on a daily basis to create this experience that we have, I got a lot of oohs and ahs of like, oh yeah, I never really thought about that before. And yet these folks had spent, in some cases, more than a decade teaching this sort of stuff, right? And it all has to do with opening up your mind and the paradigm of what we are as individuals, as human bodies, right? This will largely stay a biological conversation and not a spiritual conversation. But who knows where I might go, right? The reason for making this episode is that I have found personally a lot of mechanisms to manage my life and to understand my body better by understanding that what I am is in part, again, the biological part of me, not the atomic part necessarily, but we're going to touch on a bit of that as well. We're the summation of how electricity is metabolized by the body. We have biological sensors, we have chemicals, we have all types of constructs that carry the nervous system in our body. We know that our mind is very electrical. And I think it's interesting that we have this sort of complacency, is that right? Yeah, with the unknown. I'm going to give you a little bit of a start-off analogy, which I am borrowing from Robert Llewellyn, who borrowed it from a woman who writes a bunch of books, whose name completely escapes me. I saw her once in a slide as part of a Llewellyn project I was working on. I don't know if she's British, I don't know if she's English, but a female psychologist or psychiatrist, one of the two. I think she's a degreed individual. But she realized something, and I don't know if she claimed to be the originator of the concept, but I think it's very powerful, that men and women are different on a conceptual level. And this is going to be one of these things where men aren't as empowered as women to deal with the unknown simply because of our biology. The difference in our biology. And the way the analogy goes is very simple. When a man looks down at his private parts, they are external to his body. There's nothing hidden. And so a man, depending on how much time he's got, can examine himself and understand his pieces and parts down there. Okay. A woman looks down and does not see the lion's share of her reproductive organs. Why? Because they're inside. And when a woman deals with that, she is forced to accept the unknown. Now, this is not necessarily directly related to what we're going to talk about today, but it's interesting. How many times have you been told as a child that you have a nervous system? And, when I was a kid, the word nervous was always used to mean you're having a moment. But a nervous system is an electrical conduit of meridians that run all the way down your body, right? You see the old anatomy books back in the day, the old world encyclopedias where they had a bunch of clear overlays, and you could simply build the body from the nervous system up. And you'd apply bones, usually, I think, after that in one of the clear overlays. But it helped you understand how your mind works through the spine of your body, through the nervous system, which has a bunch of points where the nervous system leaves the brain. I guess it's not all the way through the spine, but most of it goes through the spine. And it reaches out to every part of the body. So that when you touch something, you can feel it, because that speed of light transmission of your sensor in your finger getting the feedback and sending up this signal to your brain allows you to create an image in your mind. Now, what's fascinating about this, for any of you who play video games or work in 3D software, you understand that when you launch this 3D game engine technology, most people start with like something that's already in the system. But at some point, you're building assets from nothing. You're inside of a 3D application, and you're building perhaps a human, perhaps a sword, perhaps a car. And then you bring it into the game engine, which then you add collision onto it and a bunch of other stuff. Perhaps you're doing animations algorithmically or what have you. But you know that you're building a 3D construct inside of a virtual piece of software. It doesn't really exist until maybe you 3D print the thing, right? Or it comes out as a new car that someone is building, or a plane or a jet or a rocket or whatever, right? But I was talking to my buddy Dave, the Cuban cigar expert of the world. And he had, this is really, I credit this whole episode to him sparking my brain. But it was also some other recent conversations I'd have, and conversations I've had over the last couple decades with people that really kind of got me going, this is something we all deal with, but again, we don't talk about it. And it will be very powerful, I think, for each one of us to sort of advance our sensory system, our understanding of our bodies, using this map technology, this electrical map technology. But the big debate was how a flavor is created. Because when you smoke a cigar, for instance, but it doesn't have to be a cigar, you say that you have a flavor. And what scientists have figured out, and I think very astutely, I'm very skeptical of anything that's coming out of any scientific community, and I'm probably an asshole in that way. And then I'm always questioning immediately. I don't say it out loud, but someone's telling me something scientific. Well, did you hear what they figured out? And I'm just like, skeptic mode, go ahead. But they said that a flavor is the combination of taste and aroma together. And that taste is almost entirely short-circuited when aroma has been destroyed. You hold your nose, and you remember the castor oil thing from the Little Rascals. Kids would hold their noses and drink the castor oil, right? We probably should be drinking castor oil at some point. But when you're not holding your nose, the taste from your tongue and the aroma from your nose creates this combination electrical pattern in your mind, which is known as flavor. It's distinctly different. When you smoke a cigar, you definitely have a bunch of flavors on your tongue. When you retrohale through your nose, you get a bunch of flavors up in your nose. And then together, there's this connection that is the flavor. Now, the interesting thing is my friend did a bunch of biology research on the tongue because he just wants to understand why we're tasting all these different variations from different cigars, from Cubans to New Worlds to Old Cubans to recent Cubans, all that good stuff. And what they have figured out is that even though we have been told our entire lives that our tongues have various regions of taste, bitters, I think, are on the outside edge, and sweets are in a different place, and salts, and all this different stuff, that save the very back taste buds, those big ones on the back of your tongue back there, that all of the taste buds in our tongue, when they do a cross-section of them under a microscope, they have the cluster the same identical cluster of tasting bud mechanisms, okay, that all of the regions have. And so they're now saying that science, quote unquote, that was created around the tongue is completely bunk, that the entire tongue can taste everything all the time. Now, there's a little bit of science to that as well, which has nothing to do with regions of the tongue. But for survival reasons, the brain actually has a pattern cancellation mechanism whereby smells and tastes, and probably even, well, definitely aromas, I don't know about flavors, they do cancel out once you're prolonged to an overexposure of it. We all know that when you take drugs, there's a point where you have to take a ton more drugs to get the same effect as a tiny bit of drugs at the very beginning, because your brain starts canceling out the electrical pattern that is created inside your mind, right? This all will become hopefully very interesting to you. I should say useful. Now imagine you built a computer that you want to be, well, let's just say a robot. You built a robot, you give it a bunch of sensors. It obviously has electricity going down to the sensors. You have input sensors, and you might even have control mechanisms that make the robot's arms move. You're trying to create a virtual human, some sort of replicant from the Tyrell Corporation. And so you're going to have to attempt to give the robot everything that you know that you have. And that's a nice little metaphor in your brain to realize what we're trying to talk about. Each one of the components would probably be built by a separate department in terms of the unique 5 senses that we believe that we have, right? And so you would have a sort of a hearing sensor. Maybe it's a sonar system or what have you. You'd have some microphone sensor that's going to take in hearing. Then you're going to have sight sensors, which could be all kinds of different sensors. They could be receptacle sensors like the rods and cones in our eye, sort of the CCD input device in most digital cameras. You could have, as far as touch, anything that is displacing a circuit, a little bit of electricity that goes across the wire, across the surface. Once you touch something, it's going to interrupt the conductivity of that little pad that you might put down on a fingertip, and it's going to report, hey, I think we're touching something because we're losing signal down by the finger. All right. You might put humidification sensors. You might put heat sensors all over the body. Maybe it's an epidermis material that we create. And with that, we're starting to give this virtual human all of its capabilities to take in data from wherever you put it. If it's a skin that's all over there, it's some nanofabric that has all these little microsensors in it. Well, then you put a match next to the robot's shoulder, and it's going to, whoa, my brain, my little AI robot brain says get away from heat because it's a damaging reaction that we're supposed to get away from. It damages me, and I would have to repair. If the robot wasn't biological, we'd have to mechanically repair the outside skin. Let me give you a practical example really quick so you don't lose me, or I don't lose you, excuse me, early in this episode. I've told you guys that pretty much from the age of 9 up, I have found going to sleep extremely difficult because as soon as I lay down and stop controlling my body actively, then my brain is so elated, okay, that it just plugs into the universe. And what I would now term as my research in Philip K. Dick has given me a name for, the river of knowledge. I essentially see story, my own little fictitious stories that have nothing to do with anything specific. I see scenes in films I've been writing for years. But at one point, I can't remember what it was. I don't even know what year this started for me. But I put an earplug in one night. I think maybe because of some noise or something. And all of a sudden, I slept like a baby, relatively speaking. I'm not going to admit whether or not I wet myself or not. But what I figured out, because it went on, you know, whatever acute event made me put the earplug in my ear obviously didn't persist over time, but I realized when I didn't wear it, I didn't sleep very well. And then when I did wear it, I was going to bed. That transition from the twilight zone into deep sleep / dream world, right? what I realized was that putting the earplug in the ear that is up, you can still hear in the room, but you just don't hear a lot of like really high-pitched noises. You'll definitely feel the thuds in the room. You know, anyone walking down the hallway or someone closing a door or whatever. So you're not going to be at any massive state of peril just because you got an earplug in. But what I was doing was cutting off a tremendous amount of noise that was going into my head. A lot of the ambient noise at night. Now, when I'm out in a cabin-esque kind of world, I'm at my uncle's ranch or something like that, it's not as imperative that I have these. But even just the old-fashioned noise of a wind or someone rolling over in a bed in the room next to you or something like that, someone going to the restroom at night or whatever, TV's still going, you're going to bed early because you've been flying all day. I can't get to bed if it's dead silent. But I was cutting out a bunch of electricity because that's how it works. Sound waves, an actual physical concussion to the hammer inside my ear, is then translated into electricity, which then goes into the centers in my brain that say, "Hi, we're hearing something. Process that, man." And so what I was doing was translating that I think extra energy that my brain didn't need to create sound. It's like the circuit was being overloaded. I think I've told you guys before, I've got, so far at my age, just bionic hearing. I mean, it's just crazy what I can hear. And it's not tinnitus. I'm getting ringing in my ears. I used to get ringing when I was a kid, sometimes in bed, and I don't get that anymore. But I can hear really, really well. And so my interpretation is that the hearing centers of my mind, or at least the equipment that's processing hearing, is so efficient that it's basically sending in too much. It's converting too much calorie energy into electricity to process sound, thus creating an overflow in the circuit, which goes off to my imagination. So by blocking it with an earplug, and yes, I do, when I roll over, my hand is completely, both of them have completely learned how to comfortably pull it out of my ear. I use the really the soft ones, not the plastic ones that have the little ribs on them. Those are the kind you get at the airport. I would say never put those in your ear, because when you pull them out, there's way too much suction on the internals of your ear. I think that fucking company should be banned from making those. So get the really soft ones. They look like little pieces of candy. Looks like that orange popcorn or the orange peanuts we used to eat, right? But you squeeze it, you pull it out, you roll over it, you stick it in, and it's just a little ritual. No big deal. But when that started working for me, it started my mind thinking about how all electricity in the body is being metabolized. And then later on I bump into Bruce Lipton talking about epigenetics, which is essentially the study of how the body metabolizes electricity via the environment, via your own thoughts with your neuropeptides. There's a fancy word we'll use once. And it got so interesting that when I lay in bed at night, one of my rules is if I have like a weird configuration of the sheet, you know, sometimes you get in your bed after you freshly make it, and it's all tight, and boy, you sleep like no problem, right? It's just beautiful. But then you sleep in your bed for a few days, and the bed sheet, the mattress sheet, starts to loosen up a little bit because you've been laying in it, you've been stretching the fibers, it starts coming undone from the bottom of the mattress or whatever, and you get these rolls in the sheets. And when you lay in that, sometimes it feels like you got, you know, a ballpoint pen in there with you, and you're like, oh no, it's just the sheet underneath me is all folded up. So I'll reach down and stretch it out with my hand, and all of a sudden it's smooth as glass. But anytime there's something touching me that is acutely reporting to my mind, this is here, this is here, this is here, this is here, I have to straighten that out. I have to move my leg or something. If I sleep next to someone and spoon someone, all the configurations of the human body are usually not a comfortable configuration until everything is sort of smooth, right? If your girlfriend's or boyfriend's like jabbing you with a toenail, they have no idea it's happening. But that's an acute report of pressure on your body that may result in a cut or a contusion, some type of bruising or something like that, because it's really pushing on your capillaries and breaking things in your epidermis, right? Your skin. So you typically adjust until you get that right. And then Most of us roll over 50 minutes later and we're spending the rest of the night sort of with somebody, but sort of solo at the same time, right? But the flavor thing got me thinking. Why is it when you plug your nose, you can't taste anything? And thus, by cutting off both aroma and taste, you have no flavor. And without knowing how all of the electricity and from your nervous system is wired in your head, here's what's fun when you're intelligent and not just smart. The deduction that we can make is that your palate in your mouth is wired in such a way that it has a dependent circuit with the nose, meaning it probably is wired to the nose somehow, even if it goes back up into your brain. And you guys who are doctors and neurologists, please chime in and just straighten this out for us. There has to be a logic gate somewhere inside of our mind where taste attaches to aroma, and only when the two are open do you get the three-dimensional combined impression in the mind, in the electrical mind, that you have this other concept that gives form called flavor, right? I know that's a very trivial thing, but it's something we do every single day, and you can practice with it, you know, right next time you eat lunch or dinner or whatever, take a little snack or anything, you can play with this and realize, oh my God, there's like a whole logic system to the way my body's put together. Now, that's not a huge, profound statement, but start expanding every part of your body, every part of your intake, which we'll get to, like healing rituals, to make up any one state of being, right? We as human beings believe in time because we create state recorders, right? What state am I in now? What state am I in now? What state am I now? What state am I now? And we fold it away into this big hard drive in the universe, and it tells us that we were smaller, we were older, we were younger, excuse me. We were feeling older one day. Now, with epigenetics, for those of you who've never heard that statement before, what that is the original, how do I say this? It was the original evolution, and it's not Darwinism, okay? It's not we come from monkeys sort of evolution. This is an evolution that is sort of godly, I would say. It is the fact that you are here now and that you communicate with your body through your thoughts. We know this for a fact, right? Move your toe. Okay, well, you made the decision in your mind to move your toe, and think about it. If you moved your big toe, you're moving the furthest extremity from your brain. Pretty wild, right? For anyone who's lost a limb, they talk about phantom pain, and they also talk about the phantom limb, meaning their brain is still recording sort of a looped video camera of what was there. Okay, for any of you who've seen Ocean's 11 or those surveillance cameras that are tapped into in movies where the big thing is to take a, 5 seconds of recording when no one's walking down the hallway, and then they loop it over and over and over again, such that the person's walking down the hallway, the security guard, if they happen to glance over at the monitor, they don't see any movement, and therefore they can rob the casino, right? Well, if your brain has a concept of time, of state management, I'm not on fire, I'm on fire, I'm not on fire, boom. That was 3 states of being. Then it's saying you have a leg, you have a leg, you have a leg, even though you may not have a leg, right? But all it can do is run back the tape on what it felt like when you gave your limb a command to do something, or whether it was resting or something like that. Now, one thing I don't know about phantom pain, I don't have any friends that have any missing limbs that at least were recent losses, of whether or not when you command a missing limb to move, whether or not you actually feel like it's moving, but it's not there. So think about it, though. If you were, say, even 10 years old, you've got 10 years of moving that limb and feeling like what it would feel like at various places. So you might have a feeling of your leg in bed, and you have those memories, and you can just roll back the tape, and you're playing it back up here in the brain with an electrical tape playing back, or an MP3 for you young folks, but it's not really there. It's physically not there. But because your entire state of mental, biological identity is captured in the chemicals in your brain, it is, right? I believe we also have the symbiotic soul, but that's a whole nother set of feelings and emotions, which we're going to leave out of this particular video. But a French guy who worked for Napoleon, as I've read it, he came into power, or he came into his authority / position from poverty in about 1790, and he was an utter genius. And Napoleon was a genius in calculus, so he knew how to. Napoleon was an A player that hired other A players, as Steve Jobs would say. But this guy invented something that I don't know what the French term was if it was epigenetics or what have you, but what he realized was that the human body reacts to touch, way down here in the fingers, right? I got a bunch of shadows tonight. But then it relays back up into the brain. Now, that's not a big epiphany for anyone, but this guy started thinking, how? How does that happen? It's 1790. They don't have, in my opinion, my knowledge, I don't think they had any nervous system encyclopedias to tell them what was going on. In fact, if you were Christian, you weren't allowed to look inside the human body yet, right? People did it, but they had to hide bodies underneath their houses when they were done, right? But again, studying a cadaver and asking it what it's like to be alive, it's a little tough, right? But once this guy figured out that the human body has an electrical system, he may not have even conceived of it as being electrical, but it was a messaging system, let's just say. My mind is telling my foot to do something. You don't typically wake up, and this is sort of a joke, but you don't wake up and you feel like your whole brain and your identity is in your finger, but you're using these remote things called your eyeballs to see the universe. No. We feel like our consciousness is inside our brain. Usually even further back than the skull actually represents the space. A bit like a TARDIS, if you will. And so through that just basic deduction, he realized there was messages going back and forth. So when he figured that out, he realized, well, I'm contributing to my own movement. I am authoring message packets that are going all over my body, and that has to contribute to my overall being, what I actually turn out to be at the end of the day. Now, what he didn't know was that there are these peptides that your brain creates with thought. And a peptide is sort of an instruction of how to metabolize growth. And so he also realized that, well, some of us live up in the Alps, some of us live down in valleys where it's warm a lot. We know that there's places like Egypt that are warm all the time. We know that some people might have animals around them constantly. Some people have loved ones around them constantly. You can watch animals pick on each other, right? Little monkeys cleaning each other off, right? So what De Lamarck figured out was that there's a contribution from the environment to the human body, which must also contribute to our overall being in the end of the day. Again, when I was a young kid and I didn't understand the pigment in skin, I used to ask my mom, I was like, well, why are people dark and why are some people white? Like, why am I see-through, Mom? And her explanation was fairly apt. She said, look, when people live in Africa in very hot environments, the sun is very brutal on the body, and this denser, darker pigment creates a thicker skin, which is capable of enduring massive heat exposure, right? And then when you don't have a lot of that exposure, you get less pigment in your skin because you don't need it, and you use other things like furs and what have you to keep warm. Now, it would seem that almost the thicker skin would be more apt in a person who's in a colder environment, and thinner skin in an environment that's darker, but because that's hotter. But because the sun is such I was going to say the word brutal, but that's a little bit of a mischaracterization. But since the sun is definitely cooking our body just a little bit through friction, I think that is why we have folks with thicker skin and folks with thinner skin, right? Now, as I've said, just to button up Darwin for a split second, when the Battle of Waterloo was won by the British and they started to pillage French technology, you had this aristocratic sort of, I don't know what you would call this guy. Darwin was an aristocratic child running around with his daddy's money in this boat called the Beagle. He sort of sensed evolution in his mind, that things actually change over time, that, you know, as things regenerate and regenerate, that they change. The interesting thing that is a lot of plant life is still the same in fossilized plants, right? So a fern looks pretty much the same as it does right now. So in terms of its overall change, there's a lot of problems with this theory. Of course, the idea that man came from ape is completely abolished by the missing link, which is, you know, over 100 million years of, you know, according to the carbon dating technology, where we're just missing any evolution from a hominid to a Homo sapien. And I don't want to get off into that, but that's definitely a big problem with his deal. So he essentially settled for the most mundane explanation, which was survival of the fittest, right? Big fucking surprise there. Biggest animal is king of the jungle. Biggest human being gets to tell all the other human beings what to do, until we realize how to form into little militias and knock the big guy out. And then we're all, whatever, 5'5" at one point. And we're all like, hey, that's cool, man. You're like, okay, I'll leave you alone. You leave me alone. That's good. All right. But now that we've sort of established a bunch of examples where I think most of us can agree that our bodies behave at least an average mean, as I've described it, what benefits do we have as human beings because we do have control over these things? Well, in the movie called What the Bleep Do We Know? That is exactly the name. Of course, they couldn't use the F-bomb, I guess. They could have said hell, I guess. They went into the neuropeptide, and the neuropeptide is a very amazing thing that they... this movie's packed with PhDs. There's one little bizarre, you know, wild card. A woman who's a channeler is in the movie. I really wish they'd left her out, even though she's very smart and she contributed a lot to the film. You just don't need a psychic in there, right? But the way the story goes is that if you can confidently manufacture your peptides, your neural peptides, into a vision of yourself that you want to be. And again, most of us do this through automatic training because we have been conditioned by our family and our environment on a sociological level, which turns into a psychological image of ourselves. We tend to become and remain who we perceive ourselves to be. Again, when I went back to my high school reunion a couple of years ago, everyone who sat around the room talking about how old they are, and they love those little catchphrases. Well, I'm getting old. Everyone's getting old. They just love those phrases. They looked 10 years older than me. Me? I'm like, well, why would I want to change? I like the way I look. This is the way I look. And sure, aging's going to happen, but it's going to have to force its way into my life, right? Which is why I look a little younger than I am in age, right? One of my biggest problems in life is people talking to me who are younger than me, patronizing me about the era they grew up in, and I wouldn't know anything about that because I'm so much younger than they are. I got a really good friend who's 15 years younger than me, and we used to go bar hopping together, and his biggest thing was we'd be talking to two young girls. He was about 30 at the time. I think I was about 45. And his big thing was, you're talking to two young girls who should instinctively know, just by little microscopic things in your facial features or whatever, your hair or whatever, how old you are. And he'd say, okay, girls, first, which one of us is younger? And they point at me. And then he'd say, okay, how much younger? How old am I? How old is he? I get 28, he'd get 32. And he was only 30, and I was 45, right? Because I control my mind. I control who I am, right? Now, you also know folks that are... they're the folks that get sick all the time. And they tell you that they get sick all the time. They're almost sort of addicted to telling you how sick they are. They're sort of looking forward to the next thing that will make them have a little bit of dialogue with someone or a little bit of attention from someone because they're sick. Some people believe that they will always be heavy, overweight, and so they always are until they make that change. And what's interesting about finding someone who has greatly improved their health, and it doesn't always have to be weight loss or anything, they decided to be healthy. They got tired of the game of being sick, and all of a sudden it got better. It's interesting. You wonder why I want your brain to be as strong as it is, right? Now I want you to be good as well, right? I want you to practice common law. Don't hurt anyone else. Cause no harm, right? Do no harm. But I want you to be in control of your mind, because I know that when you're in control of your brain, you tend to become the person that you want to be. We know from Manifest Destiny that there's a spiritual thing going on, that we actually control our reality. Well, you can go see my episodes on existentialism, mind over matter. I think I have one called Manifest Destiny or something like that on there. Look at the self-improvement playlist on YouTube, or search on the deepthoughtsradio.com search field. But I want to be in a planet with a bunch of healthy, happy people, right? It does not mean you need to be magazine thin, okay? A lot of people are built to be bigger. It's just the truth. I want you to be happy, right? One of the big criticisms let's put it this way. When I lived in the San Francisco Bay Area, they are almost in a state of complete fucking psychosis about Southern California. They take a shit on Southern California and almost every other phrase that comes out of their mouth. It's unbelievable. And what's really sad about that is that when I lived there for 12 years solid, I never met more unhappy people in my life. People have no reason to be unhappy. Now, I met a lot of happy people as well, of course, right? But just, wow, just unhappy. Always attacking each other, never really contributing to anyone else's success, never making an introduction that they could make to get you higher than they are in society. It was all about keep you down, they go up. But no one goes up because no one's helping each other at all. But I started in Southern California, and so I figured out when I lived down here, it was like the network haven of the world. I think I told this story a long time ago, and this is all going to feed back into your perception of your reality such that you can control it in an electrical way, okay? But I moved from a really nice little town in the Midwest to Southern California. And when I told people what I wanted to do, they didn't flinch. They were like, oh, that's cool, man. Well, great, I'll hire you to do that. And immediately get jobs doing that. But when I said I wanted to do something outrageous, like write film, I'm 18, 19 years old, nobody said, you need to go get a degree in that. You need to do this and that. No, they were like, we have a family at the church that writes screenplays, super famous ones, and we'll just hook you up with them and they'll mentor you up. Boom. You say that stuff in the Bay Area, it's like, oh, good luck. Good luck with that. Now, here's the thing. What if you grew up in Southern California, where you were constantly attached to folks through networking? Someone knows somebody. And anything you want to do, you're going to have to come up with the talent. There's nothing you're going to be able to do to want something and not get skillful in it, right? You want to be a director, but you won't study film, right? That's never going to work. But if you're willing to put in the time, either self-educated or go get the education or go apprentice somebody, they'll get you to the right people. And so every day that you wake up, you're happy. Every day that you wake up, it is, well, I want to be fit. I want to look good. And so your body starts going, well, this is the way it works. I mean, everything that we set our mind to, we can get, because there's not only your participation in your life, but as you vocalize it out to the outside world, people will help you get what you need. Again, you got to bring the skill. I always got to say that 10 times, right? But if you grew up in a world like the Bay Area, and I'm sorry, folks in the Bay Area, but this is my experience up there. And I've had it reaffirmed in the last 12 months, let me tell you. But if you're always trying to push to be something that you are and no one's listening, it's always crickets when you say what you want to do. Or, in my experience, I have been blessed to work for some of the most amazing minds that are recorded in history as being some of the most amazing minds in particular areas, and they picked me to be in their group. And so I've been validated by these individuals, and I'm only more powerful today than I was back in the day when these people liked me in their circle. And so I get into a situation where my skill sets are exactly what this group of people need. And I say, okay, just real quick, I've done this before. I work for these individuals. So just to kind of give you some qualifications, I don't like toot my own horn, but you need to hear what I can do so you can trust me with these tasks. Oh man, crickets. Crickets. They don't want you to succeed around them. They don't want you to top them, because for everything in their world is a competition. They're afraid of losing their job if you blow them away. They're not looking at the bigger picture, which might be the company you're trying to build. It's very, very sad. It's very, very sad. So now think about the idea that we actually have things that we feel electrically that don't have any names. They're not really taught to us in school. Have you ever met like a sleazy salesman? The sleazy salesman is in the business of selling you something that you don't need. And you don't find out until you buy it. Because at the time, they were telling you this sort of, they're projecting a vision of you with this object, you with this service or this thing. And your life's going to be so much better if you part with your hard-earned money to get this service. Now, unbeknownst to you, when you're young, you're actually recording all of that input. You're recording the sound of their voice, the smell of their cologne or perfume, sort of the expressions on their face, right? And so the next time you bump into someone that sounds and smells and acts like this other person, you automatically are distrustful. And you'll go, I don't know about that guy, about that girl. Sort of seems like a sleazeball to me. You're doing that based on the history of your previous experience, and usually, unfortunately, a negative one. Right? As you get a little bit older, you'll realize that your game is above theirs, and you can start trying to manipulate them back. And you go, okay, I'm going to position. I can't get rid of this person out of my life because maybe they're part of the company I work for or whatever. And you'll just start playing chess. All right, you'll be like, okay, this guy thinks he's always sitting in a fucking checkmate with me. We're just going to walk right around those rules and Captain Kirk the motherfucker out of my life, right? And unfortunately, you do have to defend yourself in one way or another with some of these situations. But your neuropeptide is sitting there waiting for your opinion about yourself. That's why it's really important that you pick your friends. You pick them very carefully. Because if you have, and of course, obviously, your spouses, your girlfriends, boyfriends, whatever, your partners, I should say, it's very important that you don't surround yourself with a bunch of negative Nellies, right? Sort of your Debbie Downers, if you were. Because one of the best pieces of advice I was ever told as a kid was that negative people, depressed people, will always bring you down. They have no capacity to bring you up. Unless you're a complete narcissist who just likes to dominate other people. I know some of those folks as well. Now as well, I always want to remind you guys, when we're talking about electrical management of the brain, there's a very interesting correlation between a CPU, a central processing unit of any computer device, and the neural density of your brain. How many synapses you have in your brain to process any incoming pattern of information. It's very, very important. Why is someone capable of being smarter than you very quickly? And a lot of times we are taught that it's a genetic sort of blocker, that through privilege, you were able to have family member after family member, generations back, get access to education, get access to opportunity, and nurture that to their point their brain got denser and denser during their lifetime, okay? And when they spawn, okay, you get a copy of where they were when they spawned. So let's just say someone had an IQ of 110 at 20 years old, but they managed to crank it up to 140 by 30 years old, but they had 2 children. One of them was at 20 and one was at 30. So one gets the 110 map and one gets the 140 map. Now, through conditions and environment and opportunity, it could be that the simpler mind was more apt to digest society at that point, and so they end up being more intelligent in the end than the 140. The 140 goes down to 85, and then 110 goes up to 160. But in terms of the genetic opportunity at the point of birth, it does go up and up and up, which is why we have to remove all the repression in the world and increase education in every sector in this planet. Where education isn't strong, we throw the books in there and translate it into their languages, localized for their culture, and say, hey, if any of you are interested in this, it's right here. But before you walk away from this, let me give you the vision of your life if you happen to know this information. So they can see the whole ecosystem of like, well, why would I study aerospace? And we say, well, because you can get into this, this, and this. Why would I study computer programming? Because you could do that, that, and that. If that seems interesting to you, pick up the book and go for it, right? But the synapse of a mind works like this. The more electricity you put through a synapse, I've said this dozens and dozens of times, but it's these core themes that I think are very important for us to think about on a daily basis. I repeat them on purpose, just so that you know. Because I want you to think about this, I want you to pass it on in conversation, and I want you to dispel myths that somehow the way that you were born is exactly the way you're going to be for the rest of your life. In some cases, it's true. We don't have the ability to grow limbs that are missing when we're born, that I know of. But we can definitely increase the cell density of our brain cavities, even though they tell you at the age of 10 you don't get any more brain cells. We know that's not true because we have dyed brains with black dye for people that are terminally ill to find out where tumors are. And not only do we find out the tumor that's all black, but we also find brand new clean cells in the brain that are newly generated, and they're in the synaptical family, okay? Your thinking family in your brains, right? But a synapse will get overwhelmed with electricity because it is being used. You're thinking. You're deducing. Now remember, memorizing and repeating, well, what are you doing there? The most you're thinking is, what did Alex Trebek say? You know, that's not real thinking. That is just discerning input, right? But when you think and you postulate, and even if you're wrong, it doesn't matter. You're using your mind, and that overwhelming electrical stimulus into your synapse will kick off a reproduction process, because it will eventually say, this is how brilliantly designed we are. We need more synapse to think about this problem, because this person is chugging in thought. And think about it. You take a Swiss watch. Let's just go with the most primitive Swiss watch that was ever made. I have no idea what year that was. Let's say it was like 1650. And you buy it. And you keep it in your family for 200 years. But you use it a lot. Well, let's just say, for whatever reason, the internals of that watch thought it was thinking. And the more you demand on the watch that it gives you microseconds and nanoseconds, you open the watch back up 200 years later, and it's got more gears, sprockets, and little thingies inside there than it had at 1650 when you first got into the family. That is a little metaphor, a crude one at that, of how your brain works. So use your brain, because you will simply improve it over time. Reading books, that can definitely help, but the type of book you read is very important. Is it inquisitive? Is it a mystery book if you like fiction? Is something making you think about facts in the book more than just building an imagination of the story in your head? I'm sure that actually helps as well, but I know a lot of people that devour books that probably aren't too intelligent, let's just put it that way. God bless them. Do everything. Read your books and get smart at the same time. If you're like me and you're totally addicted to learning, then this will just simply be the result, the byproduct of that process, right? You can sit down in front of me and you can have what you might think to be the most trivial career anyone could ever have. I mean, you might be a cashier, a young 16-year-old cashier at some grocery store. You could be a 50-year-old cashier at some drugstore or whatever. But because there's something about you and your life and what you do when you get to work and what's the process, I'm fascinated, right? I'm sitting there going, well, what about this? Well, what happens when that happens? And I'm just, you'll feel like you're a rock star when I'm talking to you, because I want to know every single thing about everything. And if I'm sitting there talking to you, well, we got time, baby. Let's download into each other's brains, right? But now think about it. You know that there's wireless technology now because of Tesla, because of Nikola Tesla and not Albert Einstein. We have alternating current, and we have wireless technology among his many inventions, right? And there's a bit of a dispute about wireless technology because another guy in Europe was doing the same sort of research. Tesla, I believe, technically beat him, but neither one of them knew about each other until afterwards, and there were some accusations, but big deal. It's a big planet. People are going to have the same ideas. Our guy's Nikola Tesla in America. Well, how do you transmit electricity across the room? Across a room, not ED, across a room. Well, we create a frequency of energy and we beam it. We essentially create a verb reaction of electricity across a room at a particular frequency. So the frequency has a certain sine, cosine, wave to it. The higher the frequency, the tighter the wave. But most of us look at wireless routers and we're like, wow, that's a new invention. Oh my God, that's so cool. Well, we know there's radar. We know there's been antennas transmitting radio for almost 100 years now. Well, I guess probably 100 years at least. We know that telegraph technology existed, back in the 1800s. And I'll tell you, I've said it once before, but let me repeat it. If you guys want to go on a great rabbit hole of unbelievable discovery of how electricity travels down a wire, go research we'll just try to find documentaries about the telegraph system, because as they were trying to move electricity down wires on poles such that we could have one person take the Morse code and repeat it once they ran out of electricity, it is one of the most fascinating realms of technology, probably equivalent to that of a silicon chip. Okay, so just a little footnote there for those of you who are interested. But now, wait a minute. Some of you know where I'm going already. If we're an electrical being, we manipulate electricity. That's how we exist. How is it that we have this inability to be everything that electricity can do? Okay, well, we have a finite amount of electricity. We run on a very, very low amperage of electricity in our bodies. Fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a percent produces pretty much everything that we need. Okay. Now, the movie Matrix did a brilliant job in creating a fictional world where human beings were being harvested for their overall power. Okay. But now, can't human beings communicate with each other? Well, once you suddenly overlay electricity onto the human body and the human mind, again, the beautiful thing about the mind and its base principle of operating off electricity, then a bunch of stuff becomes possible. A bunch of mysteries start to appear, right? Now, again, it's hard not to talk about, dreams and potentially soul experiences where electricity might be coming from some really far out places. May not even be considered electricity in its purest form, as it's transmitting information across the universe or wherever the hell we are, a message from God or something. It may be translated back into something that we can recognize. Again, Tesla's whole goal was to beam low-frequency electricity into your home and then remetabolize it back up into exactly how much power your house needed. Thus, no wires in your home at all. None of your devices were going to have any wires if Tesla wasn't hobbled before death, meaning having all of his laboratories essentially exhausted for funding and sort of just being inundated with agendas that were pointless. Like he was trying to create a weapon, a super weapon that would end all wars, because it would be the most formidable weapon on planet Earth. And if you mess with him, he would just destroy your weapons. And it was essentially a directed energy weapon, right? Yeah, we'll probably do an episode on that stuff this year. But now it's been a couple seasons since I mentioned this analogy, but since we're on the subject and we are now on point, okay, one of the other things that has been conducted, and again, some of my most skeptical friends on planet Earth that believe nothing other than official stories have told me the full litany of these experiments, and it's called the 10-monkey experiment. As I understand, it was technically done with 100 monkeys, but I'm having a hard time finding the actual incident in history and who did it and who was responsible for it. But I've had it told to me so many times. And I've experienced this personally, and you have too, okay, that I tend to give it a lot of credence. But it's this idea that they had a sort of an agrodome of chimpanzees, I believe, and could be rhesus too, I think, but I think it's been conducted multiple times is the problem. And the story changes. Just a little bit of the anatomy and the pieces and parts change from when folks tell me. But again, some of my most brilliant scientific friends with big IQs and big degrees have told me the story. So for them, I just say, okay, you want to look up my degree? Don't worry about it. I'm getting this from super duper sources here. And some of them are writers and some of them are just folks that work in science, in neurology, and have shared this with me. But anyway, the way it goes is that they had 100 monkeys in a facility, and they pulled one monkey out and they held it in captivity in a non-comfortable world, like a cagey kind of planet or world that it lived in. And the policy is that as soon as the monkey figures out what the human is doing, because it has a video of a human pushing a lever, pulling a thing to release a food pellet. They fed the monkey in the meantime, but this one little candy pellet they really wanted, right? The monkey would have to watch and then figure it out, and it took like 2 weeks or so for the first monkey to figure out how to do this. Then they put the monkey back in the wild, and they let it sit for a week. Now they're watching the monkey as well. They're watching it for two reasons. They're saying, is it trying to show anybody this thing? Or because it just figured it out. It didn't get a bunch of practice. It just figured it out once, and boom, you're gone. Then they also watched what monkeys did that monkey have no contact with whatsoever. Easy for me to say. Well, they purposely grabbed a monkey that the first one didn't have any contact with and put him back in this cage. I should technically say, put him in the cage for the first time. Oh, it got it done in about a week. Interesting. A faster monkey. Well, that's not proving anything. Maybe that monkey's just got more knowledge. It's an older monkey or whatever. Again, its brain pattern is more suited for this kind of problem. Put it back in the wild. Wait a week. Grab another monkey that neither one of them had any access to. Ooh, it's getting in about 3 days. This went on and on until every single monkey in the entire place was pulled into the cage and immediately just went, tip, tap, tip, thank you. Boom, back out in the public with all the other monkeys. They realized that without direct communication, and again, there's no history of monkeys teaching each other schematics of how things work. You do it in front of a monkey see, monkey do. But the machine doesn't exist in the wild, so there's no way the monkey can replicate this little experiment in front of his buddies. Having no contact, well, that just solves the problem, right? Okay. They realize that we communicate neurologically, most likely through electricity, with each other. Now, exactly what the frequency looks like between brains, well, that's yet to be determined. Does one monkey give the entire image of this system to somebody else? Is it a rehearsed 1, 2, 3 step to someone else? Are they all in a big giant hive mind, sharing knowledge throughout the entire facility merely through proximity? Meaning monkey A might have not touched monkey 1 may not have touched monkey 100 in any way, shape, or form, may not have come within 20 feet of the other monkey. However, 1 was in contact with 10, 10 was in contact with 20, 20 all the way down to the point where, monkey 90, who learned it from all of the predecessors upward, spent all of his time with monkey 100. And so monkey 100 was a little bit quicker. What does that mean for the human mind? Well, like I've given an analogy in the past, I've learned many instruments from other people. Mainly the guitar. That's the toughest one, I think, to learn. Drums are the second thing, but you have to disconnect your brain to control the drums in different, regions. Piano, you can pretty much teach yourself that one pretty quick. But regardless of what instrument you might be learning, when you learn it with a pro, and you're in the session, in the room with the individual, and you've spent maybe at least an hour with the person, they'll show you something on the guitar, and you can do it very quickly. It's almost effortless. Now, you do have a little bit of eye acuity, and you can remember how they put their fingers on the fret, and that does help. Well, what's fascinating is you go back home for something you may have played, because your teacher will usually, if it's a good teacher, will say, okay, you figured out that little lick. Now you got 20 minutes left in this 1 hour session. Now play that for 20 minutes. Don't play anything else. I'm listening. Ask me any questions if you have any questions, right? So you got quite a bit of muscle memory, 20 minutes. And your teacher will say, go home and do that lick every day for 2 or 3 hours a pop, and do the other ones I taught you as well. But you'll get home and it'll be tougher, especially the next day when you wake up and you're shaking all the cobwebs out of your brain. You're like, ping pong, and it's just not working. Okay. How many actors have acting parents? How many people in any skill whatsoever have parents with at least a dangerous level of that skill? Now, the kids that we know about are like the Mozarts, the Tiger Woods, and all those guys that had parents that were definitely dangerously good with the art before they taught their child. But the kid was pressured to take it to the next level and the next level. Usually the common denominators with those kids is that the parents didn't treat them like children like we do in the United States in the 21st century. Oh, just let them do whatever they want until they get to 18, and then we'll fucking come down on them hard to know exactly what their major should be, and they should get straight A's, or we're not going to fucking pay with their college, and sort of an asshole formula like that. Thing is, you should never treat a child like a child, in my opinion. Oh, you don't have to walk in and start talking like, you're some super mega scientist and hope they understand all the technical terminology that you're going through. No, you got to boil it down for kids. But man, they love it. When you treat them like adults, they respect you more. They put more effort in. And what you've done is you've put the archetype of how to do something in their brain when they are least susceptible for things to confuse them. They're not hugging a bunch of paradigms that says what you're saying is impossible, right? Remember Luke Skywalker in Empire Strikes Back, the most beautiful phrase when Yoda says, now get your X-Wing fighter out of my fucking pond, right? And he's like, I can't, it's too big. And, and he tries it and it fails. And then, and he's like, always with you, what can't be done? And he just goes, boom. And he pulls that fucking X-Wing fighter out of a little tiny dude. Now, that's a fictional thing, of course. But let me tell you, the amount of times my old man did that to me when I said I couldn't do something, which wasn't very often, but it was enough. And I realized, yeah, there's no such thing as I can't. It's just, I won't. That's pretty much it, or I'm not interested in that. That's like those only legitimate answers you could probably give back the other way, right? Now, in defense of all parents, we're kept a lot busier these days than we were back in the 70s when I got the privilege of growing up. So I got a little more access to parental characters teaching me things, from uncles to aunts to neighbors' parents or whatever. Everybody was always contributing to the kids. But it's no mystery to most of you that the DNA double helix is wired exactly like an antenna. The nucleic acids, the ACG nucleic acids, are wired in a twisted pair. Okay? Well, if I say twisted pair to any IT person, they're thinking of 100 different wire configurations, Ethernet, RJ42 or whatever it is, right? 45, can't remember. The old phone cables. Twisted pair, twisted pair. Go look at an antenna on most of the cars. Go to a mall, okay, if you don't have immediate access to an antenna. And look at all the cars in the parking lot that actually have a little antenna over the rearview mirror, up on top of the hood of the car. I used to have an old car that had this, and it was all laminated in a rubber kind of dip. And you could see the structural wire, which does nothing. And then you could see the twisted wire around the outside edge, which was the antenna. That's how I was receiving the radio. Got it? So your whole body is a gigantic antenna. This hair I got on my head, right? One of the things is I'm a little reluctant of cutting it off for is this notion that I got, I believe, very three-dimensional and existential as soon as it grew out. And then that article went around the web. I think it's true. Talking about Native Americans being very spiritual and very connected to the earth and life and spirituality in general because of their hair. And they were able to be embedded into military forces to do tracking and have sort of an instinct about the enemy. Very interesting, right? Is it any wonder that I got too much time on my hands? No. The Native Americans, with their really long hair, had a religion that Earth was a mother. Everything was one giant ecosystem. And when white man came over and started tearing the place up and pulling minerals out of the soil, they were like, you're destroying mother. You don't understand anything about how the world works. And we're like, hey, we know best, right? We got gunpowder. Well, the Egyptians also had long hair, didn't they? And I think we have proven beyond the shadow of a doubt in the last 10 years that the Egyptians were beyond spiritual, okay? These individuals learned about the brain before they had any medical equipment to really analyze the brain. Sure, they could crack open a head and look at a bunch of gray matter and stuff all covered in blood or whatever. But what did they do? Right? I get some people every once in a while, very rarely, but I get them every once in a while like, who are you, man? Where's your degree in this and that? I suppose you're an expert. Like when I talk about 9/11 and basic physics, they want me to have a PhD in physics before I know that, a floor impacting a floor below is going to take a fraction of a second to occur. It's not going to free fall. 100 stories of a building is not going to freeze fall in 100 seconds, let alone 6.5 seconds, right? All right. I'm going to give you a nice little reply for people who throw that shit at you. And we're going to use our friends, the Egyptians. Okay. I talked to some NSA guys once at a party. You've heard me refer to this a few times. You ever talking about 9/11? This is 2007, 6 or 7, Christmas party. My buddy was holding the party, said, you got to come over and talk to these guys, and they need to talk to you. And I sat down, and these are older gentlemen, I would say, probably in their 60s. And we started talking about all the physics of 9/11, blah, blah, blah. And they threw up this defense mechanism. Their Kubler-Ross denial mechanism was facilitated by trying to ask me what all my degrees were. Obviously knowing that if I even had a PhD in physics, then they would bitch and moan like a bunch of pussies that I didn't have one in metallurgy or in something, or aviation, right? I had to have fucking PhD in everything to have any opinion in the room, right? A lot of the stuff is covered, again, in basic physics in high school, okay? The irony is that they're calling out their own ignorance for having not taken the most basic classes in high school, okay? But anyway, your reply today, given to you by your humble narrator, is, how many degrees did the engineers of the pyramids have, Brainiac? Oh, well, that's kind of funny that they didn't have any degrees either, but, those pyramids still exist, motherfucker, right? They exist. So, Mr. Genius, why don't you go find all your PhD friends that you have full respect for and have them build us a pyramid. Oh, they've already tried it and they can't? They can't figure out how the things were built? They're based on pi, right? Now we look at them and they're big giant batteries with different conductivity in the limestone and red granite. Oh, maybe you can know something without some fucking institution giving you a piece of paper, right? We're going to have fun with these people for the rest of our lives now. And does it mean you can just know everything by sitting around? Maybe, but it's better if you do a bunch of research at the same time, right? You can listen to the truth, in my opinion. You can. I know it might sound absurd to some folks, and you've definitely got some friends of yours that are probably big conspiracy theory people that don't seem like they have any of that knowledge, but or any backing for their belief systems. So I think we know how to discern those folks in 2019. Maybe in 2005 we didn't quite have that power. But you've heard me talk about the fact that we know that people have panic attacks in this world. There's probably many contributing factors. I think one of the biggest contributing factors that I have found a lot of people agree with who are older and they've seen the difference between when they grew up in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s and today is that we have simply allowed the corporate world to put pressures on us that we're not biologically suited for, right? We work too many hours. There's not any time off. We have too many responsibilities. The economy, which drives everything that we do, is very unstable. Our education system is the worst it's ever been, et cetera, right? But sometimes anxiety attacks are very, very specific. They don't have to do with money. They don't have to do with any overall burden of life. Some people have anxiety of driving a car. Well, that doesn't come from any real life threat, right? No, driving a car, when you really conceptually think about what's at risk, you could drive into someone, hurt your car, what have you. You could drive head on into somebody. You can conceive of a lot of penalties as a result of not doing it correctly, of course. But the more I think about the electricity of the mind and the 10 monkey experiment, again, the 100 monkey experiment is typically referred to in the circles that I've bumped into as the 10 monkey, probably simply because it's easier to say. But if we're communicating between each other, then all of our neighbors matter too. Society as a whole matters. Fake news matters. Propaganda matters. Not only as an educational thing, but as sort of the susceptibility of believing it, right? I think I knew who posted this on our page, the Locked Facebook page. But there was a picture of a burning cell phone tower. And it said something to the effect of, as soon as we win the revolution, these are the first to go. Meaning we got to get rid of all these cell phone towers. Now again, I have a whole episode on the 5G debut of cell phone technology or cellular technology, the advancement of a much tighter frequency. It's going to be an utter bombardment to the human body. You can expect leukemia and diabetes to just fly off the charts when this stuff is debuted. We don't have any control, or at least we're allowing them, to install this kind of stuff that bombards our bodies without having any legal methodology of saying, I don't want this fucking shit hitting my body, right? I don't want it. Sorry. My little neighborhood's going to have a little blackout of 5G. I don't give a shit if every neighbor hates me for it. I'm going to live longer, and so will they, right? There's something called HARP. It's a technology based on Tesla technology. There are several HARP antennas, as I understand them, hidden all over the world. They're extremely powerful, and they can bounce big, giant frequencies off of the ionosphere down onto human beings. Well, sounds a little weird to me, doesn't it? But now imagine that you need to believe something that you're not going to believe. Some propaganda. Perhaps you need to feel soothed during a really bad experience. Perhaps you need to be, in their opinion, very excited and bothered and susceptible to programming at a different time. Something is going to happen in the world. They're going to hit us all with this susceptibility wave, okay, knocking us down, using the electricity in our mind to make us feel comfortable with whatever propaganda comes across the internet, the TV, whatever. That technology already exists, people, okay? Again, a lot of CIA agents defected in the 90s and said, well, mind control is completely figured out. By 96, we were done. We were done with every variable we could come up with. Now, not sure how much of that's true. We have definitely embedded microchips inside bowls, and you wave the red flag, and then they run at you, and you hit that thing, and they just... Now, that is more of a inhibitor of using the brain at all, which is why the bowl looks like he is going into convulsions. That's not the same thing, okay? It's kind of in the same wheelhouse as the technology. It's not the same thing. If you could make the bull dance or act like a puppy dog, well, then probably you've got more proof, right? We need to understand that our bodies are designed to work in a particular way. The reason why we don't eat motor oil and Drano is because we're not supposed to. It doesn't work with our ecosystem. It tears us down, kills us, stops our motor from working. The reason why abusing drugs can permanently screw up your entire identity while you're on them. Some of them will destroy you permanently by taking away genetic formations in your brain, creating little ant trails inside your brain, as they say. Was it MDMA will give you brain damage every single time you take it? Unrepairable is what they say. Not quite sure about unrepairable. But what if it just does a lot of damage? You take a lot of drugs and it destroys 20 years of your growth. Perhaps it destroys enough of the circuits that even if you gain back the mechanical capability that was missing, you take drugs. What if you took drugs a lot for 1 year? Well, you blow out 20 years in 1 year. Well, even if you stop, it takes you another, what, 20, 40, 60 years to repair 20 years worth of genetic damage? Why take the risk, right? Do you want to be in control of your life or not control your life, right? A lot of people just want to avoid pain. But a lot of times when people itemize their lives for the things that mother of invention moments where they actually nutted up and got the next layer of their life started and were very proud of the accomplishment, it was due to pain, right? So sometimes pain is your best friend. Sometimes it's completely overwhelming. Believe me, I understand. But as you think about every organ in your body, I want you to think about whether or not the electrical signals are something you could potentially control. Obviously, everything that is on the outside of your body is very useful for this conversation. Your skin is very, very useful. All of your sensory inputs, your eyes, your ears, your mouth, all that stuff is very, very important. I want you to remember that phrase I mentioned, I believe, in the Alien Consciousness episode, which is that what you nourish is what grows inside of you, right? So when you think about this neural peptide mechanism where the more that you think, that you're Arnold Schwarzenegger or you're whatever, Claudia Schiffer, or whatever it is you want to be. You can think of your father, your mother, your grandfather, your grandmother, whomever you want to be. That the image of yourself, to the degree you can see it as truly what you are, it will create those neuropeptides that descend into your body and start to construct that exact image of yourself. If you say, well, I like being young, I'm going to keep this. Well, that's what your body will attempt to do to its maximum capability. Now, will you see me at age 80 and I'll look exactly the same? Of course not, right? One could contest, well, maybe if you could keep yourself thinking that, you will look like you are when you're 30 or whatever. I think what will happen is that you'll probably look the best 80 you could possibly look, right? Now, again, you do have to, survey what you put into your body, both mentally, physically, and spiritually, right? You got to get bad people out of your life. Any of the negativity around you has got to be gone. If you're in a situation in your life that seems like you can't escape it, okay, you have a job that you got to keep for a couple of years or whatever, well, look at how many years you got left in your life and make the decision. Well, I can eat 2 crappy years. Maybe I only have to eat it for 1. But again, if you have an employment that's solid and you need to change your job, well, use your employment time to go find the better job instead of waiting for you to lose the job and now you're in a panic state about everything in your life because your bills are due and you don't have any money, right? So I think that's about all I have with this particular one, but I wanted to touch on the subject because I want you to start thinking about yourself as a completely electrical creature, and then dial back to my episodes about everything in the universe being electrical, right? The sun, the earth, the moon, everything's electrical, right? So we're being fed by the sun, you know? One of the things I want to put in your mind too, this is just sort of a footnote towards other episodes that I've covered, is we always talk about ethereal energy on this particular show. And it dawned on me the other day when I got up really late at night and it was cold in my house. And I realized, it's a very interesting thing that what cold is stationary objects, right? The less something vibrates, the more cold it is, and the more it vibrates, the more it is agitated and creates heat, right? Well, the idea that we can stand in a cold room, you're totally warm in your sheets or whatever, now you're standing in a cold room, and you feel yourself get colder, right? Well, something that still shouldn't have the ability to infect you with what it does because it's still, right? When I stand up next to my dresser, in terms of atomic mass, it's a still object, and I don't become my dresser just because I stand next to it. I don't even become my dresser if I sit on it, right? It might make me cold. But there's this constant exchange with all of the atomic mass we have around us, right? And it sounds like a very stupid, trivial thing to mention. But there's this, I keep telling you that you're a renewing ethereal being. You're a bunch of spiral spheres, probably, of ethereal winds. And they go up to create all the atomic components that we recognize today, from quarks all the way up to everything we see as an atomic compound or what have you. I say that to you so that you realize how susceptible you are, and I am, and everyone is, to your environment. There's nothing better than waking up in the summertime and your house is nice and just perfect. It's not too hot, it's not too cold, and you can go to the restroom or go in the kitchen and find yourself something to drink, and you're not being made uncomfortable by the coldness of your home. Now, some of you are like, buy a robe and get over it, dude. I find them so restricting, don't you? We have to understand we're electrical, and then when we look at the technologies that are wrapping around us, our cell phones, our computers, our wireless networks, our wireless cell phone towers, and any other thing like radio and other military things that are being transmitted constantly, we actually do have a sovereign right to say, I don't want your technology up my ass, literally. I don't want you bombarding my body with something that will make leukemia cells in my body. I don't want you giving me, a frequency that's going to overstimulate my insulin or retard my insulin so that I become diabetic. Go look that one up. If you haven't been to Deep Thoughts Radio, though, deepthoughtsradio.com. Man, say that a bunch of times. Please do. You can change your feed from audio to video and video to audio. If you have a Facebook account and you just want a really, really fun, low-impact way to learn new things and expand your mind, and again, use your mind in a very intelligent way, I highly recommend you click the Facebook link, join the group. It is locked because we keep out a lot of the bots that way. It's a beautiful thing. For those of you who like to be sort of in the back stage pass, get these episodes a couple days earlier than everybody else. In most cases, please join the Patreon group. You can join for $1. You get all the stuff early release. There's a store link up there as well. Anyway, take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.